There is something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while. And that's talking about leadership. It's talking about community leaders in Guild Wars 2. The Looking for group actually has been rather active recently. Steam has invigorated people, Sneb. I don't know if you've seen this. People are feeling excited. They're logging into the game. They are leading. But I think we do need to actually think about maintaining that, because we need some proper leaders in the game. Otherwise, it will just fizzle, right? There are so many people that want to get into this content. There are so many people that want to play it, but there simply aren't enough people to actually lead this stuff. Why do you think that is? What do you think is going on there?
As far as the systems are in place, I would love to see, if you're leading a large squad, that perhaps you get bonus to the map rewards or something like that.
There is one thing that does puzzle me, and I'm curious if you think this is actually something that can be changed. I have a feeling that it actually can't be, but I kind of want the final confirmation. I find that players are terrified of failure, to the point where they would rather not try than have the possibility of failure. There is something that we've been wanting to talk about for a while. And last time, I abandoned you to go on another podcast. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that happened. That did happen. It did. I enjoyed doing it.
I was blubbers for like 3 days after.
Yeah. Just emotionally destroyed. Just eviscerated on a psychological level. But good news. We have now found the time when you are sick and diseased to actually go ahead and do it. And I think it's one of the most important issues that we could possibly talk about, particularly now that we're entering the Steam age as well. And that's talking about leadership. It's talking about community leaders in Guild Wars 2. Right? Or just MMOs in general. I think they are mandatory. They are necessary in basically every game. But particularly in Guild Wars 2, actually, because you don't have as much automated group finding as you do in other games, right? You don't really have those systems. So a lot of the group making and kind of player organization has to be done by the players themselves. Can't actually be done as much by the game itself because of the game's very nature. And that is why I say to you, audience, viewers, Guild Wars 2 needs you to be a leader, to step up and actually do something in the game. Because that is actually one of the things that does cause problems. Now, the Looking for group actually has been rather active recently. Steam has invigorated people, Sneb. I don't know if you've seen this. People are feeling excited. They're logging into the game. They are leading. But I think we do need to actually think about maintaining that, because we need some proper leaders in the game. Otherwise, it will just fizzle, right? Like, there's... Whenever and you definitely know this more than almost anyone in the game, whenever you say, okay, I'll organize a group for you, you can't do it. There's too many people. Like, the demand, right, for strike groups, for raid groups, for all of this stuff is insane. Like, there are so many people that want to get into this content. There are so many people that want to play it, but there simply aren't enough people to actually lead this stuff. Why do you think that is? What do you think is going on there?
I think it's a combination of things. The first thing that comes to mind is, like you said, the systems within the game really necessitate that people take initiative and take ownership over their own experience. And the issue with that is that there becomes a lot of pressure on the player, because there isn't really any reward built in within these systems for people who do take the initiative, other than, I would argue, in world versus world. But in general PvE, there's not really anything. And in instance PvE, there's no real reason to lead. And leadership is a skill. It takes a certain kind of personality. Some people are more inclined to be good leaders. Some people really have to work at it. And so if there's not really an incentive or a reason to be the one who both has to be the bad guy all the time and has to do all the work of organizing, checking in on people, holding people accountable, etc., then it sort of disincentivizes people from doing that. So it's this weird catch-22, because you'll actually have a better experience if you're willing to be a leader, because you'll be able to get more done. And like just throwing up a tag is like one of the best investments you can make in the game, because you can literally just throw it up and people will follow you around. But at the same time, other than that, there's nothing. There's not really a strong culture of like tipping a raid trainer, or tipping the raid commander, or anything like that. And not that there necessarily needs to be, but there's just no real reason for the commander to do it when your experience can actually be really impacted by you being the leader. Let's say you have a bad team and you have to kick somebody and then they flame you out, and nobody likes to do that stuff. So bit strange because one, you kind of need leaders to do everything, and the systems sort of necessitate that people just take initiative. But two, there's a lot of negative things that can come from that, and I think people generally fear that. And then maybe three, leadership is a skill that needs to be trained and honed, and some people are just not comfortable putting themselves out there and taking that initiative.
For sure, yeah. Like the reward, I think the reward point is a really good one, because in World vs. World, we of course do have this very direct reward where you get an extra pip, and in fact, even a lot of extra pips if you end up taking that leadership position. Whereas in PvE, the reward is entirely indirect. In both cases, I think it's really important to highlight what you were talking there about the potential impact on your experience, particularly as there's a lot of expectation placed on commanders, I would say. Definitely in World vs. World, but PvE as well. If you're going to tag up, there's almost like an expectation that you know what you're doing. Right? That, you know, that you
Absolutely.
actually are going to be capable of sorting literally everything. I think players are very eager to put literally all of the responsibility onto this one player. Right? The commander becomes responsible for the entire run, which in a way, I think is actually quite unreasonable. I don't think that's really how it should be. I think the commander is taking this role where they are going to, you know, maybe put the group together, right, and make sure that they've got the right roles and handle like who they're looking for in the LFG, and potentially, if it comes to it, kick people if that's required, right? You know, if people are being toxic or acting out or whatever, all that kind of stuff. And that is what they're volunteering for. But I don't think that as a commander, you are solely responsible for the success of the run, right? That is not what's going on there. But I feel like there is that expectation. Would you say that's true? There is that very extreme expectation that the commander is going to carry,
absolutely.
essentially?
I can speak from... I think it's a little bit different, and I'm only speaking from the PvE standpoint here, but it's very different from open world PvE to instanced PvE. In instanced PvE, there will be an expectation that you understand everything. Because if you don't, the really experienced players that honestly probably could have commanded themselves, they're just going to leave your group. This happens a lot, where a group will say, doing wing one, full clear, whatever, everyone joins, you wipe once, and the commander like just doesn't know why, right? They don't know how to fix the problem, so you go in and you wipe again, and then people are just like, DPS out, quickness out. They just, like, everyone just like abandons ship, which is really unfortunate. So there is an expectation that the commander will know a lot. In open world, I don't think it's as strong, because frankly, most open world content, you don't necessarily need a lot of order in order to clear the content. So I think people are generally more kind of whatever about that stuff. But absolutely, when it comes to raids and strikes and stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I think in open world, yeah, you know, it's mostly not going to be the end of the world. I think it can be impactful sometimes. You know, like I hate the, you know what? I'm going to use it. I'm using a different example this time, Sneb. You know, for example, if you look at something like Triple Trouble, right? If you're going to have to be organized there, and you'll honestly have to think about damage as well. You know, you're going to want to kind of organize things. If you don't lead that particularly well, or you don't explain things to players, or players don't know what's going on, you're almost certainly going to fail Triple Trouble. You know, the same is true for Dragon's End. And I think that's another factor as well, is that I think a lot of players don't quite have knowledge, right? Because when I look at a subgroup, I go, okay, right, well, Met gives alacrity, Spectre gives alacrity, Herald is quickness, Firebrand is quickness, Scrapper is quickness, Harbinger is quickness, right? Tempest can give alacrity now, Druid is alacrity. I know all of that, right? All of that is known. But a lot of commanders probably don't know that, which probably means that commanding in a way doesn't feel very effective, right? You might not notice an increase in your win rate by doing this, because you don't, some commanders may not have the ability to use the commanding interface basically to increase the win rate. We talked about this a lot, right? Around certain events in Guild Wars 2, but if you organize your subgroups correctly, you will increase your squad's damage by 25% or more, right? That is going to happen, right? But a lot of players won't have the required knowledge to do that. So I think that's another reason that perhaps intimidates players a little bit, and also makes it in a way feel unrewarding. Because if you don't know how to do that, well, you may not get as much value out of that tag, or it might not feel like you're increasing your effectiveness that much by utilizing the commander role, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's tough. I'm just gonna go out and say that the number one thing is actually that people just get really anxious about being the leader. It's absolutely the number one reason why people don't do it. I think the number two reason, people might hate me for saying this, but the number two reason is probably a little bit of laziness, because it's not like you get anything else for being the leader, but you do like 100 times the work. You're organizing the subgroups, you're making callouts, you're typing in chat, you're moving people around, you're, all of those stuff. In some cases, you're in voice. And some people, they have all the capacity to do that or the capability to do that, but they choose not to because they can still get the content done in a more chill fashion. Which is totally respectable, right? It totally makes sense. But for those two reasons, I think people don't come up. And then I think the third reason is probably just that people are, what's the word? There's a bit of a gate with the 300 gold, I think.
Yeah. The 300 gold is definitely, the 300 gold one is weird. Because you know what? I'm not even totally sure if that's true. Because you know what? I've done this in open world. I've tested this. If you right click on people, right? And you go, okay, do you have a tag? So many people have the tag. It's actually insane how many people have the tag. It's more than you'd expect. The 300 gold seems to be less of an obstacle than you might think. And I certainly feel that anyone who wants to lead, 300 gold is not going to be a problem. Right? It's not going to be a big deal. You're just going to crush that. You're going to surge through that 300 gold.
Yeah. I would argue for more veteran players, point 1 and 2 are more the case. And for newer players, point 1 and 3 are more the case. I actually like to think that most players aren't particularly lazy or anything, or they don't want to be engaged. I actually think that it's just a lot of nerves. And you honestly can't fault anyone for that. I mean, when I started commanding, I got a lot of negative feedback, a lot, because I didn't know what I was doing. But I was just so tired of waiting for somebody else to do it that I just thought, well, I just better learn by trial by fire, So I just jumped in. I made a ton of mistakes. I didn't know how subgroups worked. I would ask for help in the squad chat and people would leave because they're like, oh, Cobb doesn't know what he's doing. And so going through it takes a little bit of mental fortitude. I actually think that probably doesn't happen as much anymore. I think generally speaking, if you're pretty honest and open, be like, look, I made the tag. This is what I'm doing. Appreciate some support. I think most people will actually help. But a couple of years ago, that wasn't always the case.
Yeah. It's the way we're talking about this, and from what I'm kind of figuring out as we go through this, it does seem that this is a fairly cultural issue that could be resolved, that almost has to be resolved culturally within the game. Would you agree with that? Think that's the way to go about doing it?
Yeah, the question is how. Like, we can say, oh yeah, that's the problem, but what is the solution? I think that's where it becomes very tricky. I mean, culturally as players, we can only do so much, and then we can make suggestions for the developers to add systems or promote certain things within the game. I guess culturally, I believe it would be important to reward commanders that do a good job, even if it's just by praise. Like, hey, super good run. Thank you so much for tagging up, right? Because that will really appeal to people's sort of intrinsic motivation. Like, hey, pat on the back, job well done. And then if you feel so obliged, you could throw a commander's way after a good meta run or whatever. If you want to really promote what they're doing. As far as the systems are in place, I would love to see commander tags get similar. I feel like this would be very difficult to balance. But I'd love to see it if commander tags got a similar treatment to world versus world. I think you had at one point actually suggested this, and I kind of like this idea. Make it so that if you're leading a large squad, that perhaps you get bonus to the map rewards or something like that.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be a massive upgrade, but it's enough to where the people that really min-max will be like, okay, well, I better tag up.
Yeah. I think that this actually links into another topic we talked about. I feel like if you're going to have a system like this, I almost feel like you have to give a little bit more control to the player as well as ending up on a different map. Because I think that if you do get into the situation, then a lot of people are going to want to tag up, for sure, right? And, you know, like, I think rewards will always nudge people in the direction of tagging up a little bit more. I think you would need the ability to, maybe not necessarily create new maps, but you'd need to be able to make sure that the commanders can each get onto different maps so that there can be one on each map, right? Or people aren't just like all ending up on the same map as well. So I think you need a bit more control. But yeah, I think stuff like map reward would be really good. Or, you know, stuff like magic find or whatever, like that type of approach there. That's, you know, it's not like direct, oh yeah, you just get like 10 gold for commanding an event, right? It's very much more of like a passive thing that's like a little nice bonus for doing it if you have enough players. And I think it would actually work. I don't think it would actually overcrowd. I think the concern is that, oh yeah, there'd be so many people leading. I don't think so. You don't really see that in World versus World at all, actually, right? Like, in fact, if anything, it's the contrary. I think there is still a huge lack of commanders in World versus World. It's one of the things that the game mode struggles with and always has done. Commanders are very, very rare and incredibly important. I mean, honestly, even more important in World versus World, right? Like, you know, in PvE, you know, you can, you know, all you have to do there is kind of like, you know, tag up and then people follow you around. In World versus World, there's actually like it's like a very weirdly like social thing that's on top of it as well, right? Like they're going to know you if you're on the server, right? If you're on the same like group or if you're in the same guild, people are going to know who you are, right? There's a lot of pressure on World versus World commanders.
Yeah, it's actually, I think one of the most interesting things about commanding is if you do it enough, you build a reputation. So when I was doing Drakkar, people had me on their friends list and they knew that like almost every day at this time I was going to be there. So people would snipe into my maps constantly, right? Because they knew that we were going to get it done. It was going to be fast and they could go on to the next meta. Similarly, if this has happened, by the way, I feel bad about this one. If I like accidentally leave my character with commander tag up on Dragon's End and then I log in, then maybe I'm looking at another screen. I'll look back and like 5 people will be in my squad. And I have to be like, hey, I'm actually not doing the meta right now. But it's just because people see the tag, they recognize that I've done it a lot before, and they feel confident that we're going to get the kill, and then I'm going to do a good job of leading.
Yeah.
So the more you do it, the more you sort of work out those leadership muscles, those commanding muscles, for lack of a better term, then you know, you will get a reputation. It'll make it easier and easier to get groups. So the other day, Darren's, his group was full. Shout out to Darren's, by the way. What a legend on NA. That also rhymed awkwardly. Okay. Anyway, it was his map, and I couldn't get in. And he's like, Sneb, just like do another one. And I was like, okay. So I tagged up. It was like 5 or 10 minutes after the event had already started. We were on a dead map. I put us in LFG, I ping multiple discords, I ping multiple guilds. We're full within 10 minutes. We go and we kill the boss. No prep, Dragon's End.
Yes. Yes.
And that's super fun. But the only way that people can do that is if you consistently work at that and you build relationships with people so they feel like, oh yeah, okay, Sneb's doing this a bit late, but I'm pretty confident that I'm not going to like fail the meta with Sneb. You know? And if we do, at least it'll be a good time. It'll be a good meme, and I can post it all over the internet, and everyone will make fun of them in Teapot's chat. Like that'll be good content. But it takes work to get there. It's kind of worth it in the end. Like I find that my personal gameplay experience is a lot better because I have tagged up. Now at the beginning, it was not the best, right? It was hard, and sometimes I messed up a lot. But if you're willing to sort of pick yourself up after those failures, eventually it makes the experience so much more social, interesting, fun, and engaging.
Yeah, it really does. And I feel exactly the same. You know, like I think I'm definitely that way inclined. I like to be the leader. You know, I like to be in charge. You know, I like to boss people around. No, not really. But I always like have tried to do that in games, and it certainly has made my Guild Wars 2 experience like infinitely better. I can do whatever I want anytime I want. It's almost like a prerequisite for being a streamer to an extent, I guess. But yeah, you know, that's good. It's really good to be able to do that. It gives me the freedom to do whatever I want in the game. I think it makes it a lot less frustrating, for sure. Like the way that we're able to engage in the game, right? It means if we want to do something, we can just do it, right? You want to get Harvest Temple CM? Yeah, no problem. We can just go ahead and make that happen. Or do an open world map. Yeah, we can just go do Triple Trouble anytime I like, you know? I can go do Dragon's Den anytime I like. It's good. It's a good time. It really is. But to kind of like go back to the cultural thing, what do you think are some of the reasons that players are a little anxious to kind of get into the leadership position? I think leadership is naturally a little bit anxiety inducing. Do you think there's anything particular in the way Guild Wars 2 is right now culturally that causes people to be really, really rustled when they start thinking about leadership?
Yeah, I think there's a whole, and it depends on if it's open world or if it's raids. It really depends because it'll vary by experience and even by server, I would say. But I think one of the big things is oftentimes you'll have, like, this game's been out a long time. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. That's going to be super fun. And the issue is that a lot of players do know what they're doing, but they're just not willing to tag up.
Yeah. Ooh.
So you kind of get these backseat commanders, the people who didn't want to tag up. They just kind of want to follow around. But they're not happy with how it's being executed because it's not like the meta strategy or because the commander might be new. And so sometimes those people... they might not even come off as, they might not be like mean or anything. They might just be like, why are you doing it like this? Like they'll just question a lot, and that makes you feel very vulnerable. And it's almost like if you're giving a presentation in front of a whole bunch of people and somebody keeps asking you questions that you don't know the answer to, just in front of everyone. Like you're slowly going to get more and more uncomfortable. It just puts you in a very vulnerable position. So I would argue that that's probably one of the biggest reasons. And frankly, people just don't enjoy being in a situation where they don't feel like they have control. You know, if you're going into something like this and you don't know what's going to happen and you don't know how to manage the group, you don't know about subgroups, there's just a lot of unknowns, then it does become very anxiety-inducing, and it kind of can detract from the chill vibe that a lot of times happens in open world. With raids, people will be maybe slightly more aggressive. I think the culture has shifted quite a bit in raids, though, if people are open about their experience and stuff. But I think that people will be a little bit more like, LMAO, like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't the strategy. Like, what are you doing? Why are the subgroups wrong? Like, you need to switch these people. And at that point, you're like, holy crap, I don't know what I'm doing, right? And then maybe one person leaves, dominoes. That can be really anxiety inducing. Nobody likes to be put on the spot and made to feel very vulnerable and to feel like a failure at any time. IRL, in a game, doesn't matter. It is not fun to basically feel like people are all watching you and critiquing every little move that you do and thinking that, and then you are becoming more and more self-conscious and vulnerable.
Exactly. Yeah. The thing is, though, I think that's really hard to actually change. Because to me, all those things you're describing, that's like the internet, right?
Yeah. It is. It is very difficult to change. It is extremely difficult. And that's why I said, you know, there's this cultural element. There's also the systems element. What can you do to sort of alleviate the pressure that comes from being commander? And if you can't alleviate the pressure, then reward the pressure. So there's incentive to put up with some stuff and to sort of climb that hill of experience.
I think that what is definitely necessary is, I think the things that we can fix are the knowledge stuff. So people go in confident and knowing what they're doing, and probably some system stuff as well. Like I think I would really like to see ArenaNet actually add something like that. That would in some way reward commanders for stepping up and actually leading. Some kind of system that would do this. I mean, I was going to suggest of like, oh, you know, you could even give like feedback to people. You know how in a lot of video games, like after you play a match, a PvP game or something like a team game, it will say, hey, do you want to give anyone like the they were really well mannered or they were really nice, really nice award. Would you like to do that? I think League has something like this. I think systems like that could be pretty interesting, but that would be such like another layer on top of the game. I don't think that would ever happen. It's too weird to fit in, I think. You'd have to completely change the way the game works. But I think, yeah, stuff like this where there is a systemic encouragement for players who have taken the initiative to actually step up and, go into this, pretty daunting, intimidating position of leading stuff in Guild Wars 2. Particularly, as you say, I think that's another, like, really big nuance that doesn't get talked about enough, is that if you are a new player, you especially if you're new, right? Like, you have such a knowledge gap. Like, there have been players who've been raiding since day one, or players who've been doing open world meta since day one. The amount of knowledge you have to actually accumulate, like, over 10 years, is pretty crazy, right? I think that there should definitely be an element of cutting people a little slack, right? Especially in stuff like open world, right? You shouldn't be going too crazy about optimization, right? You should just be having a good time and just trying to keep it fairly chill. But yeah, it's a very good point. I think systemic changes would be really, really good, because I think the cultural stuff is really hard to change because there's always going to be that one asshole, right? And the problem is that one asshole is much more impactful to your experience than a bunch of really silent or a few nice people as well, right? The example I always give is, imagine that you meet 100 people and 99 of them shake your hand and wish you a good day, and then one of them punches you in the face. Which one are you going to remember out of those? And which one's going to
remember the punch?
Which one's going to impact your experience and cause you to go, wow, this was a terrible day. I had a horrible day today. I got punched in the face, right? Yeah. Invariably, it's going to be the time where you have this negative experience is going to impact your perspective a lot more, right? So that's hard to get around, to be honest. Even if you were really good, there's still going to be like an asshole who's going to ruin your day at some point, for sure. But yeah, like resources from the community to teach people. And certainly I think community mentorship is one of the most important things in any game, right? It's like passing down that knowledge, right? I would say this is actually like a very big issue. I've actually spoke with a lot of the PvP guys about this, and the issue that a lot of new PvP teams run into when they start to compete is that they simply don't have the experience of playing at high level. They don't have that rotation knowledge. They don't have the same level of depth of understanding of the game, and there's no one to learn it from, right? The top players, obviously, and look, the top players aren't super keen to leak all of their, insight, right? Because, well, that's against their interests, right? So it's a little bit different.
That's what makes them top players, is they have information that others don't have. It's the same reason barons, control the TP, or they'd have knowledge of the. As soon as they leak it, it invalidates it.
And this happens. Of course, if Enko is going to talk about some of the strategies that he's using to make money, then it's instantly worthless because people are going to saturate it and nuke it, right? Like, knowledge is power in these video games. And obviously in PvE, it's less competitive. For example, Snow Crows aren't going to tell you their crazy speedrun strats, right? But I think it doesn't really matter if like, knowledge sharing in PvE is a lot more collaborative, for sure, right? On that end. But there still is an element where there is just like a lot of player groups don't mingle together, and so that knowledge base doesn't really get shared. And now I've got to bring it up. It's actually one of the reasons why I really, really liked Dragon's End and stuff like Triple Trouble, because when you're in that type of event, you almost have these communities coming together, right? And that knowledge will be shared, right? You are going to talk about subgroups when you're doing a more challenging boss. You are going to talk about strategy and leadership, and you're going to be able to learn from experienced players when we're in that situation, in a more challenging open world event. And I think like the kind of newer players and experienced players are honestly becoming more and more separated as time goes on. And actually, I'd love you to speak a little bit about this, actually, because I think you've kind of experienced a lot of this firsthand. I know I definitely have as well, because of a lot of systems within the game, it causes players to simply kind of back off to very private organizations instead of actually using the game systems. And this means that, again, you have less knowledge transfer, which exacerbates the problem that we're discussing here.
Yeah, maybe I'll talk quickly about that. So if you're the leader of an organization of any kind, whether it's a nonprofit, a business, whatever, usually you want to measure your your coworkers, your employees' performance, whatever, based on KPIs or key performance indicators, what it is, numbers, metrics, data. You need to have something to be able to say, okay, like this person is doing really well right now. How can I, keep enabling them to do so? Or, hey, this person seems to be struggling compared to last quarter. How can we help them out? Those things are really important. In Guild, I know it seems like a weird comparison, but in Guild Wars 2, there just are no metrics. You have no way to tell what impact you're having. And so if you are like a new player, you're wandering around, you might join a couple tags, you kill the bosses, that sort of validates your experience, your build, your gear, whatever. You just would assume that you're performing really well, which is perfectly normal. The problem is that you might be contributing 1% of what the person next to you is, and you just had no idea. So that creates a lot of problems within groups, and I think what that ultimately does is it discourages people from grouping up with random people because they don't trust each other. There's this constant distrust among players because you can't inspect their gear to make sure they're running a reasonable build. You can't look at people's you can't look at like what traits they have selected to see if they're giving alacrity or not. So there's no accountability, and because there's no accountability, people just can't be bothered to play in situations where they feel like it's going to be a coin flip every time. They don't like that. People enjoy the data. So what I've seen is a migration to more and more private groups, and I know personally, I didn't even realize this till a few weeks ago. I started to realize that I was in this bubble of like Hardstuck and the Skane gang and all my guilds and communities and people I know and have created relationships with. Metas don't fail for me ever. And typically they're probably at least 50% faster than what would happen in open world. Like they're very efficient. I don't ever do a public Dragonstorm, for example. I only do the private ones. So when I sat back and reflected on this, I realized that there are probably a whole lot of players that perceive the game to be much more difficult than it actually is because there is no mentorship for them. Nobody's sitting there in the squad and being like, hey, your build might actually need a little bit of work. Or, hey, if you want to be a little bit more efficient, you might try this skill out. So that knowledge transfer has diminished over time because people are gravitating towards more guaranteed wins.
Yeah. And, exactly as you say, right? Like you end up with everyone in a bubble and the knowledge transfer just completely dissipates a lot, right? And yeah, you also have no way to look at, that's the advantage of having something like a gear check. Because obviously, it can get, the gear check might not be super popular in Guild Wars 2, but one really good thing with you can just immediately say, oh, I wonder what this guy's running. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Especially if
that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's this guy doing? Like, that build looks kind of interesting. How is he doing that? Like, why is that so strong? That's
why
a
is that
huge
guy not
thing.
going down? Why is that guy able to, stay up the entire time?
Yeah.
What does his build look like?
Yeah.
Curiosity will get to people, but the problem is that there's an extra step right now, and that extra step is you have to take the initiative to whisper this person who may or may not
and
be
that's
online
not
or
happening.
offline,
Yeah.
and who may or may not respond.
Yeah, that's
it's difficult.
That's very difficult. Like, and it's weird, isn't it? Because that barrier, you might go, oh, that's not a really big barrier, but any barrier whatsoever is like infinitely more obstructive than literally right-clicking on someone and having no barrier, right? And there are a lot of these weird things about Guild Wars 2 that do somewhat inhibit people in learning to an extent, right? Like. And now, but especially because of this, right, a lot of these features where you can't really kind of guarantee what people are doing or like determining like how effective players are or how you are as a player, it does cause people to very much say, okay, well, we're going to make our own system. We're going to just sit over here in our private group and never interact with people. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
That's a really big thing. I think most players, or a good chunk of players, probably view a lot of meta events as a lot harder than they actually are, especially some of the more challenging ones, right? I would also say that it causes people to think the game is a lot quieter than it actually is. If you actually,
clicky, even worse, right? They'll either think it's dead or they think that they're not part of the group, which sucks, right? If you have people that come into the community and they're like, wow, this community is like really private, like what the heck? Then they're not going to have a good experience. They want to be able to jump in and talk to people. Some do, at least. Some people will play more solo, but if you're failing meta events and you can't figure out why and you're asking around and no one will talk to you, and then people just keep saying, just go to this Discord or go to this Twitter or go to this website, you'll be like, well, why don't you just tell me? You know?
Yeah. It's a meme. It's a very interesting meme.
I actually thought of another interesting point.
Oh, really?
It might be a slight aside, but there's kind of different levels of leadership. You know, there's the you have the tag, and then there's the you being willing to take initiative and trying something new and putting yourself out there. This is particularly important in raids. It's not really as relevant in open world, though. There may be times when it applies. But one thing I encounter a lot is I will do, let's say, Deimos. I get there, I'm like, all right, who wants to hand kite? Silence. No one wants to hand kite. Who knows how to hand kite? No one. No one knows how to hand kite. Who wants to learn to hand kite? No one. No one wants to put themselves out there. And this creates a problem in instance content because suddenly you're making it more and more difficult to keep moving forward, you know? It sucks when you have to take constant breaks and downtime in raids. And so you basically have to like beg people to learn. If people are willing to put in initiative and just say, yo, I don't know this, but I'm willing to give it a shot. I think that's huge. And then where I've been personally trying to change my method is I try to set them up for success and also the group success. There are some roles in raids and strikes, etc., that are big fail switches. Like if you mess up, it's over. But there's actually more than one way to conquer these things. We've just become accustomed to very risky strategies because those strategies, they work and they're just a little bit faster. Good example is Kadim, okay? Kadim. If you have somebody that's learning to kite, because I swear on NA, very few people know how to kite at Kadim.
Mm-hmm.
If you have somebody who's never done it before, send 2 people and say, stand with me. I'm going to call out when these things happen and you're going to learn to kite. Well, we get the kill. We'll do it together. Yes, it's going to be slower. Yes, the other group is probably going to have to do a few more mechanics. But at the end of the day, you now have somebody that understands how kiting works, and you've enabled their success, and the group isn't held back by training. So this mentorship, right? In open world, you might say, hey, does anybody want to learn to command? And if somebody is so, if somebody obliges, then what you do is you say, hey, I'm going to make you the tag. I'm going to shadow you and help you the whole time. You make me lieutenant. I'll tell you what I'm doing with subgroups. I'll tell you what call outs to make, and we'll do this together. And that takes a lot of the pressure off them, a lot. And what it does is it empowers them to later go try it by themselves because they've seen and tasted success when the spotlight was on them, but in a more comfortable setting. It's kind of like if people are practicing for the circus, the tightrope act, they're probably going to put some like cushions down when they're first trying some new tricks, you know, but as they get more comfortable, they'll take those away.
Yeah, it's training people is hard. Teaching people is a skill. It's a big skill. It's a difficult skill to learn. And I do think that, yeah, there is something to be said for, in a way, training people to train other people. I think when people say raid training, a lot of what it turns into is that people are going to just bash their head into it and hope it dies, right? That's how I feel like a lot of training is. And you end up with like a 5-hour Doom run and no one's happy, right? You know, like that's what tends to happen.
Not good.
And I don't know exactly why that is. I think that probably is kind of because there just aren't that many people who are really familiar with mechanics. I think that just comes down to population, right? At the end of the day, I think there aren't that many people in the entire game who really know how to play the game well, right? There just aren't that many people. I mean, look, you can look at Harvest Temple Challenge Mode, right? I would say that the players who get through that, yeah, okay, they know what the hell's going on. Players who are capable of that, yeah, they are the kind of players that you want a lot of, right? Kind of out there showing people the ropes and how the game works, right? All that kind of stuff. And I think we've got around kind of 250 to 250 people have done it now, I believe, approximately. That's not a lot in an entire video game, right? That really isn't. And of course, not all of those are going to be super interested in training other people and teaching people. I'm not saying that you need to have done Harvest Temple CM to actually teach people. Obviously, that's a ridiculous standard to have. But like, there aren't. The point is that there aren't that many people who are like really rock solid with their understanding of the game, right? Like, how many times have you had this, right? You go into a raid or a strike mission. How many people do you think know every single mechanic, right, on every single fight? It's probably minuscule, actually. Like, most players will learn kind of their role that they do, like 1 or 2 roles, and then after that, they don't know how anything else works. So if anything did go wrong, they'd essentially be totally lost, right, and they wouldn't be able to do anything, right, after a certain point.
The problem is that every time you learn a new mechanic or a new class, it can really set back your team.
Yeah.
So, I mean, my static, for like 3 months plus, we forced everyone to rotate roles. And I think my static would agree with this. It wasn't the best experience because people would fail the stuff, and we were so used to being proficient and fast and stuff that it felt like we were backsliding. And people were unhappy with that. But once we reverted, everyone knew every mechanic. If any mistake was ever made, people knew how to back it up. And so now our static is really, really efficient. So it was kind of worth it in the end. But most people are like, look, man, I don't have enough time for that. I don't want to learn multiple roles. I don't want to learn how to play multiple classes. Second I do that, it's going to take me forever to experience this stuff. So at the end of the day, I think if we put our bias aside, we might feel like it's easy to learn some of the stuff. But for the average player who only has a finite amount of time and whatever to get into some of this stuff, it feels like an insurmountable obstacle. And it feels like a huge investment that's not worth it. And so people would rather just play one role.
Yeah. And essentially just wait in the LFG a little bit longer, right? Or have a slight inconvenience when things, you know, you need to replace someone or find this specific role. Yeah.
I always try to encourage people to learn multiple roles for that very reason. If you know multiple roles, you get into more groups.
Exactly. You know, there is a payoff, but again, it's quite indirect, right? It's going to be a bit of a investment to do it, right? And it'll pay off over time, but it won't pay off immediately. It will take some time, for sure.
Here, I'll address a comment quick. Hearing Sneb talk about how people keep lying about their knowledge of the fight and lack of interest in learning, I'd never want to dedicate my time to teach these people. I don't think anyone would. No, right? I mean, I learned a personal lesson when I started trying to teach people in the LFG. I'd see training runs, I'd go in, offer to help. At one time, people came and flamed me out because I tried to buy a Soul Beast gear because they were doing 2k DPS and they were like insulted by that. I was like, hey, like, we're just looking at the meter here. I don't know if you have like the build and the gear, like, can I help you? And they were like really upset by that. So I learned, do not impose your help on others, right? There are people that do not want the help, and you also have to respect that. I think I was a little overzealous at times, thinking, oh, I can save the raid LFG. I'll just like help everyone. But ultimately, there are people, they don't want your help and they don't care. And you have to respect that. What you do is you foster your own culture and your own community, or you join a community where that is the culture, right? That's something I really focused on with the Scan Gang. Is I was like, look, these are the standards. Everyone now has a standard. We're willing to help you get to that standard. But we have standards so that people can all be led by a common vision. And then everybody that joins, they want to be trained. They understand that we will critique your gameplay and we will make suggestions. And if you're uncomfortable with that, then we're just not the community for you. And that's okay, respectfully. Like, we're not mad at you and you shouldn't be mad at us. But it's important that you find the communities and the people that do want the help, if that's what you're going to do. Or that you do seek out people that have similar mindsets so that you can play in the way that you have fun. Quite the contrary, if you're a player who is not at all interested in preparing for raids but just want to jump in on the emboldened every once in a while, more power to you. The more raiders, the better, I say.
Yes.
But at the same time, don't expect to go into a group that's advertising for experience and for people to be like, yeah, sure, you can play staff core LE healer, that's fine. Some people might want and have different expectations. And if we all just would respect how each other plays and the ways in which we individually have fun, I think that we'd have a much better gaming experience overall.
That is a good point. And certainly, yeah, you obviously want to always play with like-minded players and make sure that you're on the same page as everyone that you're with. There is one thing that does puzzle me, and I'm curious if you think this is actually something that can be changed. I have a feeling that it actually can't be, but I kind of want the final confirmation. I find that players are terrified of failure to the point where they would rather not try than have the possibility of failure. That is, in my opinion, extremely common. Very common, actually.
Oh, absolutely.
But
I mean, we see this all throughout life, right? I remember being in university, and there was this accounting course that was like really hard. It was the hardest. It was the most failed course at the university. And I remember walking into the second midterm, and in 10 minutes, over half the class had left.
Wow.
They like handed the paper in and went and dropped the class because they knew if there was even a chance that they were going to fail, they just didn't even want to bother. They weren't even going to try.
Yeah.
Happens a lot.
Is there anything that can be done about that? Because I actually do. I struggle to relate to that a bit. I admit it. I'll admit that. That, to me, is weird. I don't understand that mentality, actually.
I probably am slightly different. I don't mind failing as long as there's progression. I don't like it when we make the same mistake over and over and over again and do nothing to change it. I find that really annoying. Like, you go into a pickup group and they're like, no idea why we're losing to Veil Guardian, but you know it's because they're not timing their heals right or something, and we just do nothing to change it. So we just keep making the same mistake over and over and over again. I don't find that enjoyable. But if you're with a group and you're teaching them and they're eager to learn and they're trying to adapt and change, like I did Doom CM yesterday, and I was despair gut because we didn't get the kill. But at the same time, I was proud of the group because there's a ton of people that had never attempted Doom CM before. And they went from dying the pre-event to getting it to 3%. So that's pretty big progression. That's exciting, and that's fun. It's fun to see you get better and better over time.
It is. I think, you know, that progression element is important, right? The fact that you'll eventually get there. But yeah, I don't mind failure at all. You know, I think that, in fact, failure motivates me. I am motivated by losing. It makes me want to win even more and try even harder, right? When something goes wrong for me, I'm going to come back and I will have another go, right? And I won't stop until I'm satisfied. You know, that's a lot of what actually drives me to do stuff, particularly a lot of the stuff I've done with tournaments, is the fact that I look at all the other tournaments I've done and I go, wow, I didn't like it. It was bad, and now I need to do it better, right? Because it wasn't good. That's what means I have to do it again now. I mean, I can't not do it now. I have to, right? And yeah, I don't know. That's certainly been somewhat successful for me, right, with the way I do things. And that's by the way, that's not just in gaming as well. This is like a huge motivator for me in sport. I used to swim competitively, and yeah, when I would have a shit race, I would go and train harder right after that. I'm like, okay, we need to go even harder so that never happens ever again. That was a horrible, unacceptable race. Can never happen again. I don't know. I want to help people get over their fear of failure. I do. I think you should embrace failure. That is your opportunity for growth. If you don't fail, then you're not really, you know, there's nothing to overcome, right? You know, you've got to be able to jump the hurdle, right? You've got to get something done. I like it. It's good. It keeps it fresh, keeps it exciting. That there's a potential for failure, that something might go wrong, right? If you're going to win 100% of the time, it's just, you're not really doing anything, are you? You've just got an illusion of doing something, but you're not actually doing anything important. But yeah, no, I would really encourage people, gamers, players, just, you know, in gaming and basically everywhere as well, do not fear failure, my friends. Everything you do, you will fail every single time up until the point where you don't, right? Like, after that, then you succeed, right? And it feels good. Feels very good.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is
Fear
sound
is the
harsh,
mind
but bear
killer.
with me.
That's true.
It is a bit of a fool's errand to try to like to expect that people will get over that, because I think ultimately it is a mindset thing, and as much as you can encourage people and positively reinforce their efforts and stuff, even when they do fail, there are going to be people that they're like, this is a video game. I don't want to fail. I fail in my real life all the time. I just want to win. I just want the dopamine hit. And we also just, I guess, have to kind of be content with that people enjoy video games in different ways. And some people, they don't want to do the hard content. They just want to chill.
That's true. That is true. Oh, no. The thing that bothers me is that, and this is a little bit mind-ready, and I think you've got to be very careful with mind-reading and, kind of analyzing people in this way. But I get the impression that there are actually a lot of people who want to get into this type of content, or at least like to have a go, but they never do because they are too nervous to do it. Right?
Oh, yeah.
And
yeah, absolutely.
they don't get over that initial barrier. And even though once you get over the barrier, it's like, oh, okay, it's not that bad, right? Oh, it's okay, right? It's all right. It's fine. They never do, because the initial anxiety, the initial kind of fear is actually a little bit too much. And I actually really don't like that. That, to me, is really sad. And it upsets me. I'm not saying sad in like the, in the bad way. I'm saying sad that it actually makes me unhappy, because it's like, wow, these players are essentially feeling frustrated that they can't get into something and they aren't able to, because they're, because of other reasons, that they're too worried, right? They're anxious. They feel like they can't do it, and I think that sucks, because you can do it. You absolutely can do it. That makes me sad. I don't like that. I want to make that not happen so that all players can basically do whatever they want and enjoy the game as they see fit, There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I've raided with people who have mid-raid said that they need to go because they are gonna go like vomit because they're so stressed. Like they just have a huge anxiety. Some of it might be because if I'm streaming, then they're on the stream and they feel like their mistakes are being highlighted. Some of them they feel like it's a lot of pressure to win or whatever. And again, like, that's not fun for them. If there's somebody that's having like real issues with anxiety or whatever, then frankly, raids might not be for you. I would love it if people would continually fight against that and do their best to to fight that, because anxiety sucks, and I think people do. But ultimately, if something is causing you significant harm, you ought to be careful about continuing to engage in it, and that's something that I completely respect at the end of the day. But I agree with you in that it does make me kind of sad when I experience things like that. I'm like, oh man, I'm not sad that they're like wasting my time or anything. Quite the contrary. I'm sad that I couldn't help them more.
Yeah,
like, I feel bad that I couldn't help them get over that, or like that I didn't do a good enough job to make them feel comfortable. It's a tricky situation. I think lots of people feel that, especially in a team, not just in a game, but in real life, right? They might, if they're working with other people, they might just feel really self-conscious. And, in a game where they're going to fail and people are going to all be privy to all of that data right away, that might make them feel really uncomfortable.
I thought that's actually a pretty good place to wrap up that topic. It kind of went off track there a little bit, but it's a good one. Long story short, don't be afraid, gamers. Get in there. Dive into the ocean of Guild Wars 2 organizing and carry the community, because we need you. There you go.
I mean, the TLDR is basically leadership is a skill. It's difficult, and it should be respected, and we should try to culturally give more praise to the people who are willing to put themselves out there, even if they're not the most experienced.
Yes.
Systematically, within the game, there are probably things that can be done to incentivize more people to tag up, whether that's map reward bonuses or whatever. And then ultimately, lots of the reasons that people really struggle with, tagging up or being the leaders, it puts them in a vulnerable situation. People have anxiety. They might not have all the information. Perhaps the communities become a little bit segregated because of all these private communities, and maybe people feel like they're not part of the club sometimes. But what we can do is provide mentorship, encouragement, and give people opportunities to succeed so that they can hopefully overcome some of those challenges to the extent that they are able.